News of the day with our panel. Here with me in Canberra is Liberal MP Alex Hawke, and joining us from Melbourne, Labor MP Kelvin Thomson. Thank you both for your time. Let's start with the Prime Minister. She's been at a coal mine near Newcastle, fronting some questions, some pretty tough questions by the sounds of things, from miners who are pretty concerned about the future of their industry. Julia Gillard maintains that the industry has a very strong future, Kelvin Thomson. If coal has such a strong future, if we're going to keep exporting millions of tonnes of coal to China for it to burn instead of us, what's the point of trying to cut our emissions in the first place?
Well, the point of cutting our emissions is to do our part towards saving the planet from the extreme climate events that we risk if we don't cut emissions. And the modelling work that the government has done has indicated that setting the carbon price in the way that we have, $23 per tonne for the first few years, and then afterwards letting the market do that, will enable us to meet substantial carbon reduction targets, a reduction of 5% by 2020 and a reduction of 80% by 2050.
But why do we even have these targets in place? I know both sides of politics have the 5% target, but why do we have them if China's going to keep pumping out so much carbon into the air, and if there's no global agreement?
Every country has a role to play, David, and Australia needs to be a good international citizen. We are, in fact, very large emitters of carbon per head, so we do have a responsibility to play our part in relation to this. The 80% target is a science-backed target. It's based around saying we don't want to see the planet's temperature rise by more than 2 degrees Celsius between now and 2050, because frankly we don't know what the climate outcomes would be of allowing such a large temperature increase.
Alex Hawke, yesterday Tony Abbott seemed to describe as crazy the policy to cut by 5% 2020, but that's your party's policy, isn't it?
Yeah, look, every member of the coalition has committed to a 5% reduction by 2020, including Tony Abbott. I think what is important to note, though, your point is exactly right. Without international action, there is not going to be any movement on climate change. And, China is going to increase its emissions up to 500%. And we're talking about in Australia a 5% reduction on 1.5% of the world's emissions. It's a very small amount. So I think Tony is right to point that out. That is a very small commitment.
Well,
now,
why do you have that commitment then?
Because we agree with the science and the principles which say we should do something. We are reducing our carbon emissions by 5% by 2020.
Why should we do something then if like you say, it's not going to do anything?
It is right to do something.
For what purpose, though?
Well, because the science tells us that, the humans are making a contribution to climate change, and we should try and reduce that contribution. We all accept that. However, it is not of any sense to say we should tax Australia's industries and businesses and population without global action. And with the huge economies of China and the United States not doing the same things that we are doing, it all starts to fall apart, and that's where the government's carbon tax really does fall to pieces. There is not going to be similar action in these countries that will reduce emissions.
Tony Abbott's been focusing today on consumer confidence. It's pretty dismal at the moment, pretty low. Not a lot of people buying goods in Australia. And he says the carbon tax is in part to blame for that. But surely his campaign fueling the fears out there in the community must be contributing to consumer confidence as well.
Yeah, well, look, you're absolutely right. Retail confidence is right down. All your retailers will tell you people are not spending money. There's a lot of factors about that. I think the government's spending is contributing to that. The way the government's managed the economy over the last 4 years has contributed to that. But I think what people are doing now is the same as 30 years ago, putting a bit of money under the bed. They are worried about what's coming because the government itself can't convince people of its own economic or environmental arguments about this tax, and that's where I think the government's in trouble. Their own arguments are making no sense. You can't have faith in their own modelling. The modelling the government's put out is modelled on the CPRS from last year in parts. It's not even modelled on the carbon price that they say it's going to be modelled on. So it's little wonder that people out there are very concerned about what they're hearing, and I think that is indeed adding to the fact that people are not spending money in the economy right now.
Kelvin Thomson, what do you put down this massive drop in consumer confidence to?
David, I think that presently consumer outcomes are in a good place. The truth is that the spending that we saw before, household savings ratio in negative territory, was unsustainable. We now have unemployment below where it was when we came to office and falling. We have inflation below where it was when we came to office and falling. We have interest rates below when we came to office. We have an improvement in the household savings ratio. We have an economic situation that other countries around the world, like the UK, the United States, in Europe, would die for. We are in an excellent place in terms of our economic outcomes.
Yeah, but Kelvin, I mean, you've got to say, if people aren't spending money, that's a very serious thing for retailers around the country, and people are not spending money. And that's a result of lack of confidence in the government.
All the evidence is that our unemployment is trending down, our inflation is under control, our interest rates are on hold, the economy is in a very good place. It is true that there are areas of the economy which are not faring so well. We have this situation as a consequence of the mining boom, that areas such as manufacturing, retail and tourism are doing it tough as a consequence of the higher Australian dollar. But our overall economic outcomes and economic prospects are extremely bright. And as I say, people in other countries would love to have the economic circumstances that we enjoy.
Look, we'll have to just move along a little bit. We did come into this program with this debate, just moving back onto the carbon tax debate, and also particularly climate change. It's a debate we don't often have very much anymore, because both sides of politics agree with the science that says, as a whole, the world is warming on average, and it's been caused by humans. But we did see this debate today with Dr. Richard Dennis and Lord Christopher Monckton, and they were talking about managing the risks of climate change. Let's just have a quick listen to that.
Most humans, most of the time, actually adopt the insurance principle when considering how to make decisions. That is, most of us insure our cars. Most of us spend $1,000 or more a year insuring our cars, and very few of us get to the end of the year and think, idiot, didn't crash my car. What am I doing? Wasting my money on a precaution that didn't even turn out to be necessary.
Professor Dennis raised the question of the insurance principle. Just in case there might be a risk of a large asteroid hitting us, we should spend 150% of global GDP from now forever to try to make sure we have a large cricket bat to knock them out of the way again.
Now, I understand there was a little bit of debate within the press club itself as to whether to even host this debate. I want to ask you both, should we still be talking about the science in this matter? Should we continue debating, or is it done? Alex Hawke.
Oh, look, absolutely we should be debating these things. I mean, that was a humorous and light-hearted debate, which raised very important points on both sides. I'd make the point both of those participants are pretty partisan on both sides of their points of view. And I think it's good to have these things have an airing. But there's a genuine debate out there, and I think Lord Monckton made the point, and he's right about this. For centuries, scientific method has not relied on consensus. In fact, sometimes entire consensus about things in the world has proven to be wrong. So I think we've got to constantly challenge ourselves about all these things. And as Mr. Dennis made the point as well, this is an insurance principle, a risk. He doesn't know if the risk is going to come in or not. He's advising we take out insurance, but if the risk does not come in, then of course we should be talking about that debate. The climate may change in a way that is totally unpredictable to us anyway.
Kelvin Thomson, do you agree with any of that?
Well, people are entitled to put different positions, but frankly, in terms of a debate, Lord Monckton's views are not held by any serious climate scientists, and they're about as useful in terms of public policy debate as arguments over whether cigarettes cause lung cancer or whether the earth is flat. The fact is, Alex acknowledged earlier on in our discussion that we are experiencing climate change. We're experiencing it as a result of increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and I welcome his acknowledgement of that. The truth is, we're discussing now what is the best means of reducing the carbon in the atmosphere. Our view is that a market-based approach is the most appropriate way to do that.
I hate to pull Kelvin up on that, but there was a time on the Earth when most people, the consensus was that the world was flat, and it was proven to be wrong. So, those things can come undone. But, on the principle that humans are making a contribution to global warming, well, of course, we all agree on that. It's a question of the nature and the scale of that contribution and whether that impacts the climate over time, and that's up to the scientists to resolve.
All right, well, we better move on, but I want to look at some soul-searching that's been going on in both parties. First, Peter Reith has done a big review into the election last year. He's essentially urged the party to have more of a focus on policy. Alex Hawke, is there a bit of a policy vacuum in the Liberal Party? Do you need to focus more on policy rather than sort of attacking the government all the time?
No, well, look, Peter Reith's review has called for a number of things, including greater participation of the grassroots membership. I think he's right on those calls. A lot of our state divisions have taken those things up. Other states, I think, will follow suit with that. In terms of policy, he said there's a need to get some policy in the field earlier in some areas. And look, that report was enthusiastically received by our federal executive and adopted and noted, and those recommendations are going to be actioned. But I make the point, to the last election, we took substantial policies to that election and received, the support of half of the electorate. We're the single biggest party voted in the election. So I think that's a good indicator. We did have well-costed and articulated a good suite of policies, but Peter Reith has highlighted some areas where we need to do better, and I think he's right about that.
The ALP's also been raking over some coals relating to last year's election. Kelvin Thomson, a senior government source, is quoted in this morning's Australian as saying that Kevin Rudd has killed the Labor brand. Is that the way he's viewed by some in Victoria?
Look, I think, frankly, that's the kind of journalism that gives the authors a bad name. There is no one quoted in relation to that source, and it talks about things that happened over a year ago, so it doesn't really merit serious discussion. And the fact that one newspaper thinks that's worthy of running says more about them than it does about the Labor Party. The truth, in response to Alex's observations about the Liberal opposition, is that they are seeking to get into government essentially with a blank cheque, essentially saying as little as they possibly can about how they'd handle the budget, how they'd deal with industrial relations, how they'd deal with climate change. It's the sort of thing you've seen at the state level with the Baillieu government and the O'Farrell government in New South Wales, seeking to get in with as little scrutiny as possible and as little articulated policy as possible. Alex talks about what the Liberal Party took to the last federal election. In fact, that was revealed to have a massive black hole in the costings.
This morning in quite a few of the papers, speaking of the brand, there's been these reports that a new sitcom is going to appear on the ABC, which is going to feature the home life of Julia Gillard and Tim Matheson. There's been a few things, along those lines. For example, Julia Gillard, the Prime Minister, often referred to simply as Julia these days in newspaper, print and the like. Kelvin Thomson, I'm interested to know, do you feel that the brand of the Prime Minister itself is being damaged in any sense by things like this sitcom, by the tone of the debate, by certain elements in the press and the public?
Well, it's intriguing that the ABC didn't ever have the courage to run a sitcom about John and Jeanette Howard in the Lodge. I think that's noticeable. The last time I can remember them doing this sort of thing was when Max Gillies was taking off Bob Hawke. I think the truth is we've all got to have broad shoulders. We've all got to be prepared to have a laugh at ourselves and have others laugh at us, but it's interesting to see what the choice of subjects has been.
Just a very quick response to that. We've got to wrap it up.
I think the government's core issue here is the fact that the Prime Minister lied to the Australian population. That's the source of the anger and the outrage. It's not confected by the media. It's not confected by the opposition. It's reflective of a real sentiment in the electorate at the moment, caused by her herself. Now, look, I remember watching Rubbery Figures as I was growing up in the 80s. I mean, there's always been satire and comedy around the Australian Prime Minister. I don't think this should be a source of political debate. I think the government's getting angry at the media because it is not performing well with the voters themselves, not because the media is confecting it or the opposition's confecting it.
Alex Hawke, Kelvin Thomson, thank you both very much for your time. We are out of time on Lunchtime Agenda, but thanks very much for your company. We'll see you next time.